We are going to go to Peter Dutton. He's speaking live now in Bondi Junction in Sydney's eastern suburbs at a synagogue, obviously in solidarity with the Jewish population there, and solidarity with the New South Wales Premier, who's looking to strengthen laws against anti-Semitism. Also comes as the release of those hostages happened overnight, and that fragile ceasefire holding. He's also been asked about many economic matters as we kick off this election year as well. Let's listen in live.
Provide support to their staff and customers, help them grow their business, and it will be an economic boon for those small businesses, particularly cafes and restaurants at the moment who are doing it tough. Don't forget that 26,000 small businesses have failed under the Albanese government over the course of the last 2.5 years. And behind every one of those 26,000 businesses is somebody who's lost their house, lost their life savings, lost their job, lost their sense of being. And I don't believe that that's in the best interest of our country. So we'll have a lot more to say about how we can help people in small business over the course of the coming campaign. Happy to take any questions.
Mr Dutton, you pointed to tougher sentencing as a manner to address growing rates of anti-Semitism, but there's also the broader issue of social cohesion. I guess how would a coalition government address what appears to be growing levels of division in our society?
Well, what we needed from our Prime Minister in response to this national crisis was strength of leadership, and he just hasn't provided that. We do want social cohesion. We want the rule of law to be enforced. We want people, regardless of their religious belief or no religious belief at all, regardless of their political inclinations, regardless of their heritage, we want every Australian to be treated equally. And I think the point that Peter was making before is an incredibly powerful one, that this is not just an attack on the Jewish community, this is an attack on every Australian. And it's the Jews today, who next? And if we look back through the course of history, when good people don't stand up and provide support to those who are in need, then the downward spiral continues. And there can be no social cohesion in our country when the Prime Minister is incapable of responding to a national crisis. And it's only the Prime Minister's pride at the moment that's standing between him and a decision that he can make to convene a national cabinet. If not now, when, Prime Minister? We're seeing the firebombing of cars. We're seeing people doxed. We're seeing children going to school protected by armed guards. If now is not the time for a national cabinet, when is it? When is the Prime Minister going to stand up and provide the leadership that the country craves at the moment? And for every day that the Prime Minister abrogates his responsibility and continues this weakness, our country continues to suffer. And that's not something that we're going to tolerate. And we've, I think, been very clear in the announcements that we've made today that we will have zero tolerance from day one. And we will do whatever it takes to restore social cohesion and the rule of law, and to have people like the family we spoke to this morning, who have lived peacefully in the same home in our country for 60 years. And I want them and their children and their grandchildren to enjoy that same peace and tranquility, not what people have experienced over the course of the last 15 months.
Believe, though, that we do need more aluminium being produced in Australia?
Well, we certainly need more aluminium being produced in Australia for as long as we believe that we're going to need windows for building and the use of aluminium across a developed economy like ours. If we want to export those jobs and export that industry, well, that's exactly what the Prime Minister is promising to do with his policy. I can't find anywhere in the world an aluminium smelter, a high energy use aluminium smelter that is only run on wind and solar and batteries. Now, if there's an example a Prime Minister's got, well, I'd be happy to hear it. But what I do know is that this cruel hoax that the Prime Minister's pulling needs to be called out, because for the Prime Minister's policy to work, and let's just understand the practicalities of this, he would have to install 22,000 solar panels every single day. He would need 40 wind turbines each month and require 28,000 kilometres of poles and wires to deliver this policy. It's a $2 billion con job, and it's going to drive up power prices, and it's going to deliver blackouts and brownouts. And over the course of the last 2.5 years, we've seen a threefold increase in the number of manufacturing businesses who have left Australia to go and build in Minnesota or go and build in Wyoming or Tennessee or in Malaysia or wherever it might be. We lose the jobs, we lose the economic productivity, and they import the aluminium at a higher price. So it's inflationary. And that's why under this government, inflation staying higher for longer. Now, just to put it into context, those numbers that I've just given you, according to the Clean Energy Council, only 3 wind farms with a total of 115 wind turbines were commissioned and connected to the grid across Australia in 2023. So the Prime Minister needs to explain how this fantasy is going to come true. We believe strongly in renewables, and they need to be firmed up by nuclear power, which is what 19 of the top 20 economies in the world are doing. Australia is the only one not. And so I want to achieve our net zero by 2050 outcome. I want to make sure that we are responsible in terms of our environmental footprint. 22,000 solar panels a day is a big impact on the environment, on wildlife, on all sorts of economic impacts, on adjoining properties and local farming communities. And the Prime Minister doesn't talk anything of that. All he's interested in is winning votes in green seats in inner city, Sydney and Melbourne. And he's forgotten about people in the regions and in outer suburbs. And that is not how I will run our government, along with our senior ministers and leadership team, if we win at the next election.
Just one more, if I may, on
Yeah.
gambling advertising. Labour is unlikely to introduce any further legislation on this term. Is the coalition still committed to tackling this as an issue, and how quickly do you think?
Well, the short answer is yes, and we've provided our policy. But again, I mean, the Prime Minister, after the death of one of his members of Parliament, who was very passionate about this issue, committed himself to reform and change of the law in this area. Now, we're at an election, and obviously the Prime Minister is not going to introduce this legislation. So it's just another demonstration of the weakness of leadership. I've known 7 Prime Ministers since I've been in Parliament. I've worked closely with 4 and observed those on the other side as well. I've never seen somebody so incapable of making a decision or so captured by his own incompetence and weakness. And our country's suffering as a result of that. And these are tough times for our country. We need to make tough decisions, and we need to make sure that we act in our country's best interests. And at the moment, it seems the Prime Minister is just not capable of doing that. Okay, thank you very much.
That is Peter Dutton there, live in Bondi Junction in Sydney's eastern suburbs at a synagogue. He's made a number of announcements. He's called on Anthony Albanese to take a tougher stance on anti-Semitism, which we have seen a rise of, particularly over summer. Peter Dutton there just announcing that if he is elected this year, that he would introduce mandatory minimum sentences for terror acts like firebombing a synagogue.